Hello, everybody, and a warm welcome to Thursday's The 42 Rugby Weekly. Gavan KC, and joining us, as always, is a quite fatigued-looking Murray Kinsella on what has been an absolutely insane week of rugby and general news. Murray, how are you?
Yeah, it has been a busy few days, again, unexpectedly in many ways, but waiting now to find out if I'm going to France tomorrow as currently scheduled for the Leinster-Montpellier match. It seems to be up in the air still, and as we record, we're waiting for a final decision. So, a bit more uncertainty on this end. How are you, Gav?
Yeah, I'm brilliant, and I'm only joking. You don't look fatigued. You look fantastic, despite it all. Now, listeners at home, it might be difficult for you to believe that Bernard Jackman does in fact have a real job, a big boy job, and he has important business to tend to this week. So we've drafted in our old friend, former Munster hooker Mike Sherry. I think you'll agree he's a fitting replacement. But Mike, how are you? Are you as stressed as poor Murray here on the call?
No, probably not. My day-to-day isn't as greatly affected as his seems to be at the minute. But yeah, it has been a crazy couple of weeks, culminating in what's happening at the minute. It's leading to a lot of uncertainty. Must be very tricky for media, organisers, players, coaches. So it's a very challenging time when it comes to sport, and then consideration around public health and everything else that's happening at the minute. So it's not really changing, is it? Similar to last Christmas, unfortunately, but please God, it won't be as bad as it was last Christmas.
Please God. I suppose there's only one place to start, Mike, and that's whether or not you were the rat in the camp who squealed on Peter O'Mahony after his video about Gary Owen.
No, certainly not. I saw it. Yeah, look, it was tongue-in-cheek. I'll say no more about it. It was storm in the teacup, really.
It was.
Yeah.
We'll speak a bit more important matters. We're going to start with Munster in a moment and obviously look back on the other three provinces' successes in Europe as well. Chat about the latest in this saga that it's become between the women's players and the IRFU, and now political involvement. And we're going to field a few of your questions from home as well along the way. But Mike, I don't know, amid all of the doom and gloom, there was something a little bit magical about what happened in Coventry on Sunday, wasn't there? Did you enjoy it as much as you anticipated you might?
Yeah, God, it was brilliant. One of the most enjoyable games I've watched since I've stopped playing. It was just all hands on deck. You could see how much prep and organisation and coaching that went into that performance. So absolute kudos to the coaches, the academy side, Ian Costello, Andy Kiriakou, Greg Oliver, whoever else they drafted in. And then the senior players I thought were outstanding, to a man. Peter O'Mahony, who we've just spoken about, had an exceptional game, as well as Tyg Byrne. He was just in on every ball, making life so hard. And I think, as we've discussed on this pod before, if you have someone like Pete and Tyg line out breakdown time, you could have all the plans in the world. It's so hard to play rugby when those guys are on song and disrupting what you're trying to do. And then all the young guys took their chances. I was absolutely delighted for Scott Buckley. Haven't seen a lot of him, but he can clearly throw a ball. He can get around the park. His try was a great moment, and so was the man of the match panning into him on the bench. It was heartwarming stuff. So yeah, it was great from start to finish.
Try and take us into the minds of some of the younger guys there, Mike, if it's even possible, because these were unprecedented circumstances for them. But for a 19-year-old, I mean, in some cases 18, say 18 to 21 overall, to be lined up for not only your first Munster appearance, but an appearance in Europe to mark that debut, and for those guys to have such an impact. Like, any regular human being, I'd imagine, would feel the weight of the world on their shoulders during the week, knowing what Munster means to the fans, knowing what Munster probably means to all of them personally, and suddenly you're responsible for this outcome on the pitch against the odds. How do you explain the performances that they all produced, and really that there was none for whom the occasion seemed too big? Like, does that come down to coaching? Does it come down to just individuals and that old cliche of fearlessness of youth?
Yeah, I think it was many factors. I do think the coaching that would have gone into that group over the last 2-3 weeks, and then obviously the months and years preceding that, so that they would be up to scratch. They would be in line with all the calls, the patterns. So that obviously had a massive part to play. I think, as Pete mentioned in the post-match interview, the senior players really stepped up in terms of their own performance, but coaching the young guys along. That would have been very beneficial to them. And then I think in terms of the young players themselves, look, they would have been probably nervous. Well, most likely, absolutely, definitely nervous. But to get an opportunity like that in most of their first games in a European Cup match against what was a depleted Wasps team, the day of the game, they had more depletion, obviously, through COVID. The red card, everything went Munster's way, but all credit to them. They just, everything went swimmingly. Everyone knew exactly what they were doing. I would have thought that the 2 weeks leading up to it were incredibly positive, incredibly structured, laser focused on the job at hand. And that's what you can get out of young guys when you prep them, you coach them, nurture them along. And yeah, they might be in for this weekend after that performance. You never know.
You never know. Murray, we probably spoke in the podcast about how we expected Munster would go over there and perform. And even when it first became a possibility that they would have to play, we never probably anticipated that there'd be so many debutants, but certainly a significant portion of academy players. I had this feeling in my waters that it would be so Munster to go over there and get the job done. Now, they were helped along the way. There's no point in beating around the bush in the sense that Wasps were depleted, as Mike says, plus the red card early doors. But were you surprised at all by the extent to which those young players actually grasped their opportunities to a man?
Yeah, I suppose, because it was so impressive, particularly the guys who started it. And it was such a wonderfully Munster occasion, if I can describe it as that, and use that as the descriptor there, in terms of the rallying, the backs against the wall, the support yet again. Obviously it wasn't a massive sellout crowd there, but it felt like a home match, to be honest, when you were in the stadium. Even on the flight over, it was really cool. There was a group of lads from Ennis on my flight, obviously supporting the three young guys who were playing for the Ennis under-18s only a very short time ago. That element was really cool. The whole province kind of coming together in that manner. Obviously, Owen O'Connor from Waterford, there was real pride down in Waterpark, RFC, I know, and people from all over the place. Scott Buckley is Kinsella originally, and I know there'll be real pride at what he's done as well. So it felt like this kind of coming together that was going to culminate in the kind of performance we saw. As Mike says, the senior players were outstanding, and it was so striking just how much they have enjoyed this chapter. Peter O'Mahony put it up there with the most enjoyable of his career, which is a massive statement to make. All of them who we've spoken to since the game have said as much. It was as enjoyable as anything, and they'll remember it for the rest of their careers, which might seem like a ludicrously grand statement, but it was a really unique set of circumstances, and just a wonderful occasion, really, in European rugby. But yeah, the younger players really excelled, and they benefited from having that experience around them, of course. Patrick Campbell's only 19, but he looked really assured. He took his try beautifully. You could see some of that real athleticism that he possesses for that finish. Someone sent me a couple of clips of him playing for Cork in the All-Ireland Minor Football Championship when they won it in 2019, and you can see the movement as well there. You can see why they were so excited about him in that sport as well. Daniel Okeke obviously is still raw, and I'm sure people are excited about what they saw from him in terms of his power and his desire to get into the game. They got him into the game really well, I thought, Munster. I think he was a top tackler, loads of carries as well. Obviously had that key moment where he gets back and prevents Wasps from scoring down the short side of a maul. Owen O'Connor had some really excellent moments, took a little time to get into the game and had those couple of early frustrating penalties, but then had that massive block down moment just before half time, which was his kind of calling card. James French obviously was in for a tough day at scrum. He's come through as a loose head initially and has only transferred over to tight head relatively recently, but he really put in a big shift around the pitch as well. So it was just wonderful to see that. Buckley, as Mike said, was really impressive, and honestly I think he can really kick on now in that hooker depth chart as well. So yeah, I was a little bit surprised just how assured they looked, but it was just fantastic to see, and it's great for Munster rugby and Irish rugby to see that those players are coming through, that those players have that kind of talent, because it's always talking about Leinster's production line and them being the ones that Irish rugby depends on, which is true to a large extent, but Munster have some real talent there as well.
Well, let's stick with yourself, Murray, for this question from Jonathan Edgeworth. This came in the Members Rugby WhatsApp group. and it's members.the42.ie if you want to become a member of the 42 and land into that group with the intellectual heavyweights therein. He was saying, watching Okeke play for Munster, at only 19, he showed raw power and strength that Ireland always seemed to lack when we faced bigger teams. He blew people away in the carry and the tackle. Should the IRFU fast-track players like this, I'm surprised he didn't get more credit for his performance. I thought he got a lot of credit, to be honest, but nonetheless.
Yeah, it's fantastic to see that he's at 19's got that ability to impact a game in that manner against guys who are more experienced, even with Wasps' level of depletion. I mean, he's still raw, as I said. He's got loads to learn from what you hear around Munster about, tactical stuff, being prepared for the game, having all the brilliant off-field habits that the top pros have. But it is worth reminding everyone that he is just 19, and that will come hopefully with a little bit more exposure and a little bit more experience. I just think it's brilliant that he's got the opportunity that he probably wouldn't have had at all but for this. When would he have made his Champions Cup debut? Potentially 3-4 years time, depending on how things went with people's injuries, etc. And yeah, you can say fast track him. I suppose there have been brilliant back rows there in Munster ahead of him, and senior guys returning, they need games and they'll want to come back in and show what they can do, and no doubt they would have impressed if they played against Wasps in that game. But I think it's just a reminder to everyone in Munster that the talented players can really step up if they're given that opportunity, and you hope to see plenty more of it, while also obviously respecting, I suppose, the senior players and what they've done in their careers.
Somebody like Okeke is especially exciting though, Mike, isn't he? In the sense that you can't be sure yet what the ceiling is. He's obviously incredibly powerful, incredibly dynamic. And there's that old dichotomy where you can teach a sort of a raw, powerful athlete to become a rugby player over several years, but you can't actually teach a rugby player to become an athlete in Okeke's mould. And that's why he's a bit of an outlier maybe.
Yeah, it would be remiss of me not to mention that he's a former Hartskull great like myself and Killer and a few others. So I said to get that cheap plug in, but he's special. You can see he's special. To be able to survive in the contact area as well as he did at that young age is extremely impressive. Like, I saw him play schools rugby. I think most of us have seen the wonder try he scored in that Schools Cup game. So you could tell that he had that ability, that talent, but to step up several levels up to Champions Cup level, and to do that was something that would, you take a step back and go, this guy is special. In terms of fast tracking him, look, I think it's a warranted discussion, but the IRFU have a business. They have a system that you go through the whole process of academy, development contract, senior contract. If you are showing particular talent and development, yes, they can fast track you, but maybe a tad premature for Okeke. He does have another bit of development to go, but who knows? He could get a couple of more appearances and skyrocket. And if that's the route they decide with him, brilliant. But he does have a bit to go in terms of tactical stuff, but all the raw materials are there, and people should be very excited about him.
Yeah, and just on that, like, I know you're kind of messing with the Hartskull reach, but it's absolutely an important point as well. Sorry, you're still on the payroll in there. And I think he played in Thomond as well, didn't he? But like, he is a Limerick forward, and like, we've discussed this several times in the pod, Gavan, and it has been an issue for Munster in terms of I suppose that source of players having slightly dried up to a great degree recently, and the work Munster have been trying to do. So that's also wonderful to see. You talk about the players' backgrounds, and it's really important that there's guys from Limerick as well. And as Mike knows, the pride of coming through and seeing it and growing up in Munster rugby and then being part of it. And I think fans definitely grasp that as well. You see with someone like Craig Casey as well. And Okeke has that kind of vibe around him. I think people are almost drawn towards him and excited about him and want to see him do well, and that's an important part of it with that Limerick side as well.
Mike, you were quick to credit the senior players, and justifiably, even outside of Bernard O'Mahony, the midfield was pretty solid, did what was asked of them. Conor Murray was calm to the point that it actually felt like he was a reassuring presence with a lot of chaos going on around him. The two wings scored and did their jobs. But if I could bring you back to Peter O'Mahony for a second, I think it's interesting that in the last couple of weeks, he has mentioned that he's enjoying this more than he's enjoyed any part of his Munster career so far, or it's up there at least. And he had similar things to say about Ireland's autumn as well. He's cracking a few more jokes in interviews, which we know he truly despises doing. And it does feel as though he's enjoying things a little bit more. Do you think it's a realization on his behalf that he's in the twilight years and he might as well start enjoying it? And that might be coinciding then with, I mean, the phenomenal performance we saw at the weekend, but equally when he came on against New Zealand, his influence there, like, I don't know, just that sense of happiness might actually imbue his game if he can maintain it for the next few months, couple of years even.
Yeah. With Pete, I think he plays up to being grumpy and giving out, and that's just him. He's always absolutely loved rugby since the day he was born. He was kicking a rugby ball around. He lives and breathes rugby, so he absolutely enjoys his day to day. Cracking jokes and interviews, that's a new avenue that he's gone down, and it does show that he is really enjoying it. He made comments after the November internationals that it's been the most enjoyable month of his career. Then similar comments after the Wasps game, that the last 2 weeks, and that game will stand the test of time in his mind as one of the most enjoyable and rewarding experiences that he's gone through. Helps that he's injury free. He's playing quite regularly. Strange that he's enjoyed Ireland so much whilst being quite a regular sub, which I'm sure he's not happy with, but it does show, look, he's just a team man. He'll come on, he'll do his job in whatever position you put him in. He's playing extremely well, and yeah, long may it continue. It's great for Munster to have a player of Pete's quality playing like this, leading the team from the front. Spoken to a couple of the guys of late, and they just said he's maturing and developing into, not that he wasn't previously, but just a top class captain. He's ticking all the boxes, and it's great. He can be there to nurture a guy like Okeke, and bring him along and tell him the tricks of the breakdown and the line out, which can add further to the raw materials that Okeke has. And yeah, I don't see him packing it in anytime soon. He had a couple of injury ravaged seasons, but I can't think of the last time he's been injured for an extended period in the last 4 or 5 years. And the more often you're playing, the more often you're training, the better your game will get if you can mind your body, which he seems to be doing at the minute.
What's involved in that maturation process then as a leader, Mike? Can you give us any kind of an insight as to what he might have gotten better at in that role?
Well, I think you can see that he's definitely relaxing, enjoying interviews, or not getting as stressed out or as bogged down by them, as an example would show that he's just maybe relaxed a bit more. He has a young family now. I suppose with the whole COVID and the world the way it is at the minute, speaking to the Munster players that I have mainly over text, as I haven't seen anyone pretty much since all started, because they've been bubbled up and the way things are, but they all feel incredibly fortunate and lucky that they're not working from home, they haven't been laid off, that they have gotten to continue along with their daily life fairly unencumbered by everything that's happening. They do have to be very strict. They do have to live restricted lives around not picking up COVID, and that can be quite limiting what they can do day to day. But overall, they are getting to live out their dream and not really be affected by the world the way it is. So there may be an extra appreciation for what he's able to do at the minute. Perhaps coming to the twilight years and all that together maybe has made him a bit more relaxed and added to his leadership. And yet,
Murray, a little bit of disruption through no fault of the player's own that reared its head during the week. I don't think anybody was especially surprised, or maybe they shouldn't have been especially surprised to hear that Johann van Graan was going to depart the province. What do you make of the timing of it? Like, it feels like well-worn ground to say that it's not ideal that it happens at this stage of a season in any sport, actually, and we've seen it have probably poor consequences for many teams over the years. At the same time, I don't know, would it have been beneficial if the doubts had lingered towards the end of the season? It might have actually become a bigger distraction. Do you think that was the thinking in just releasing the news or confirming it now as opposed to then?
I actually was initially surprised when maybe last week I heard that he was going to Bath, because I had heard obviously that he'd signed his new 2-year contract. I think we discussed or alluded to it a little bit on this pod, and that was the expectation he was staying, but it has obviously changed now. He's invoked this 6-month release clause, same as Rassie Erasmus and Pat Lam, and he's going to head to Bath. So it is a bit of a change of direction for him as well. I mean, he was happy to sign a new deal with the IRFU. They didn't announce it for whatever reason, and maybe there's something in that, I don't know. But it is complete disruption. It's typical Munster in many ways, that we just talked about this brilliant, momentous springboard for the future, and then there's this disruption again. It's a strange one. Like, speaking to people, and I obviously have never, Mike probably knows better about Johann and how he works, but I don't know if there's a great unhappiness or sadness that he's leaving. Obviously, the players have said it was a bit of a shock and a bit of disruption. But I think on the whole, there's a bit of excitement about Munster going in a slightly different direction. It's obviously not ideal in the sense that stability is something they've spoken about a lot. I know Keith Earls wrote about it in his book recently. He thought it was excellent that there was kind of cohesion and continuity in the coaching side of things. Billy Holland as well recently said as much. And you'd already lost Larkham, and now you've lost your head coach as well. Maybe P. Ferreira follows Johann van Graan to Bath. He came with them to Munster as well. So it's looking like maybe a completely new coaching team. If they can get Graham Rowntree to stay, I think that would be really excellent business. And it does sound like he's been enjoying working over here as well. So yeah, it's upheaval again. It's another new head coach. It's another new direction. But when I look at it, I'm almost excited to see which direction they go in now, and how they structure this coaching team. Because that's the thing now. There's a clean slate here. They can rejig it. They can have a director in rugby and head coach if they want, or a head coach and attack specialist. When Larkham came in as senior coach alongside a head coach, sometimes those lines can be a little bit blurry, I suppose. So I'm fascinated to see where they go. And there's all sorts of names floating around. I don't think there's a really obvious, available, certainly, candidate right now. But it'll be fascinating to see how it all pans out.
What was your initial reaction, Mike, and to where did your mind wander as it searched for potential replacements immediately?
My initial reaction was not that of great surprise. Where my head wandered would be the usual suspects, your Rowan O'Gara's, your Paul O'Connell's, your Mike Prendergast's. It doesn't really align with their career trajectory, their contracts at the minute, but that's not to say that they won't be drafted in. It might appeal to them. They might be approached. It just might work out, which would be obviously great. Any of those three would be exceptional candidates to bring on board. I think they've got good track records, a good grounding in what Munster is about, and they would add a lot to that group that's there. But as Murray said, they're not really available. So what can be done there, I don't know. Other names that I actually thought about, Jason Holland, Dutchie down in New Zealand, someone, Tyler Blyndell is someone that I thought about, but whether he'd have enough experience or be the right candidate, or if he would be interested in coming back on this side of the world, with things are the way they are down in New Zealand. I know it's very strict and whatnot, and it's a big upheaval for a young family as well. So he was just a name that I thought. Whether or not he's a realistic option is another thing. And in terms of how Johann has done and the feeling, I think Johann's done a good job, in fairness to him. You know, he's incredibly diligent, and he preps the squad, and no stone is left unturned in terms of preparation and coaching. But perhaps people want a change in terms of style of play, getting to those later rounds of knockout competitions and not reverting back to what would be deemed as the South African style of play, conservative, up and under, physicality. And maybe Munster need something different in their DNA to break these teams down when it gets to the later stages. So that would probably be the overriding feeling that I would think. Very good coach, did a decent job, but when it came to the later stages, I don't think the supporters would feel that he would be the man to get them to the promised land of a trophy. Hopefully that's not the case in 5 or 6 months' time when it comes to late May or early June. It's time for finals, but up until now that's proven the case. But yeah, I'll be sad to see him go. He's a nice man, has given his all for Munster, and I'm sure he'll continue to do so.
Just on the timing, Gav, which you mentioned, it's probably good that it happens now because Munster also get a longer time to go find the right people, and it's well flagged that the positions are available as well. From what I hear, there's been all sorts of names being sent to David Nucifora and through Munster as well from agents all over the world. There's always going to be interest, and it's Nucifora who runs this. It's an IRFU position, the Munster head coach role. Obviously, Munster have an influence in it, and they'll have their ideas about it. But Nucifora is the one who signs off on all of this stuff. And I suppose he's gone out and got coaches recently. You think of Andy Friend, that was a Nucifora appointment, obviously from Australia. Dan McFarland, I think, as well, is the one that he drove there as well. So it'll be interesting to see what he comes up in his contacts book. I'm sure they'll be on to Razzie Erasmus as well, who recommended Johann van Graan for that role. And your man Dave Vessels, who's another South African, that name again has been linked. He was close to getting the job last time when Johann got it. So I think there's going to be loads of interest and loads of different names popping up. But they've really got to nail this one now and try and get some more stability.
Just on that stability.
What do you think, Murray? Oh, sorry, Mike.
Sorry, just on that stability, and you spoke about Keith Earls. This will be his 7th head coach since he got involved with Munster, which is it's a stark number when you think about it. He's 12, 13 years into his career, 7th head coach. So yeah, stability has been a massive issue, and I really do hope they get the right candidate. I think if Johann had won something, the 4 or 5 year tenure wouldn't seem like such a big deal, but the fact that it's yet another head coach coming in with yet again not achieving what the squad and the fans want is probably what makes it so jarring, maybe, that yet again we're moving on to a new setup and there hasn't been success to the level that the squad and the fans want.
Yeah, and there is a fine line as well, Mike, isn't there, between having that continuity and consistency and just being consistently good rather than great, if you know what I mean? Because it's all well and good wanting the same personnel to steer the ship, so to speak, but if they're not getting exactly what the fans want or close enough to it, and like Van Graan, for all of his qualities and for all of his diligence and hard work, probably didn't quite get them over that line, then consistency is actually probably no good to you. Like, maybe this does come at the right time ultimately. Look, okay, maybe not ideally in the middle of a season, but if he'd stayed another 2-3 years and the level of success was the same, which is maybe 0 trophies at the end of it, it's a lot worse down the road, and the likes of Keith Earls have actually missed the opportunity to win something at the end of their careers.
Yeah, look, there's never a good time to announce. I think it's given them good time to find the right candidate. Some would say it's too early in the season, it's too big a disruption. If it was later on, they'd say they gave him no time. So he was in a lose-lose situation in terms of when he would announce it. And if he'd stayed on for 2 or 3 years, you never know. But it would appear that they've reached their ceiling in terms of the knockout stages, in terms of what they're trying to do from a coaching perspective. So to get someone in to refresh it, to rethink with the group that they have, because there's absolutely no doubt that when Munster have their first choice team on the pitch with their bolstered bench, with no injuries, that they definitely have a squad that can go and win trophies in the league and in Europe. I firmly believe that anyway. And consistency, a lot of clubs would pay a lot of money to have the consistency and the performances that Munster have throughout the season. So I think we're greedy in Munster because of the success that we had in the noughties, that special group that came through, the trophies that they won, the amazing days they gave everyone. So as players and as fans, we're greedy about how we want to emulate those days. It's going to be hard work, and the day they eventually do it, it will be a special day, but it will have been well earned. A lot of heartache and scars will have been built up over the last couple of years, over the last decade plus. And when it does arrive, it will be special, but it will take the right man and the right cocktail of everything to come together and actually achieve it.
It looked like Ulster found that cocktail away to Clermont at the weekend, Murray, didn't it? For one day only, at least.
They were absolutely superb. Again, like, Munster's performance was so impressive, but Ulster were right up there in terms of performances of the weekend. An amazing start to the game. Obviously, they were dominant for the first 30 minutes and got into a really good, strong lead. Their attack was causing severe damage. Anytime the ball was in James Hume's hands, there was panic in the Clermont defence, really. He beat 11 defenders in his 8 carries and just made such an impact on both sides of the ball, it should be said. He defended well as well in what he had to do, making good reads, getting low tackles at times, being aggressive when he could get a good shoulder onto ball carriers as well. Obviously, Stuart McCluskey, outstanding alongside him in midfield, and Mike Lowry just brilliant at fullback. There was maturity from John Cooney, I thought, at scrum half, and how he added some, I suppose, kicking elements to the game and some balance to their game, and not always running everything but being alive to that prospect as well. And then the forwards, which again is always a question mark really around Ulster in these big games, I thought they were really impressive. Kieran Treadwell was winning the gain line repeatedly for them. Tom O'Toole's tackling continues to just be a massive strength for the team, and it's brilliant to see a guy who looks like he's going to have an important role for Ireland as well moving forward, really taking his chance there with Marty Moore injured. They had a lot of injuries, obviously, Ulster, including Ian Henderson, including a lot of other excellent players as well. And then they got into the position in the second half where they had to deal with the setback of going behind, of Clermont having all this momentum, and they managed it well. There was a crucial bit of maul defence just after half time. I think it was Vermeulen helps them to get the sack, and Clermont knocked the ball on. It was a massive moment in the game. Obviously, they still got in front, but Ulster backed their ability to attack, and it was that brilliant break from McCluskey tipping the ball to James Hume on an excellent line to line break them that led on to Timony's try, and it was wonderful to see them get in front in that manner again and show maybe a bit of mettle that hasn't been there at all times. I thought back to the Leicester match last season when they did get into trouble against Clermont, and I thought, oh, this is kind of getting away from them. Vermeulen had just gone off, and you think maybe they're just going to struggle with this mentally, but they showed great resolve and they showed great impact across the board, and it just shows exactly what they can do. They've been a little bit up and down in terms of their consistency, but when they get it right, and even with those players to come back, it's a really exciting blend.
They do seem to be getting it right more often than they're getting it wrong now, Mike, even in a lot of these big games, at least very recently. And I thought the most impressive aspect of Ulster's performance was, as Murray outlines there, the fact that they did back their attack. Like, they built their lead by playing ball effectively, and then when push came to shove, they just continued to play ball and they dug it out. And to do that down there, Munster did something similar, probably a little bit more narrowly last season, but to do it with a packed house, I mean, it's a day to be celebrated for them and something to really build upon.
It is, yeah. It's look, that's a marquee day to go down there in front of a packed stadium and to put in a performance like that, to stay true to their attacking patterns and how they wanted to play rugby as well, to go behind, to claw it back. From start to finish, that's a real day that you can kind of build a season off. And you're right, they are getting it right in the big games more often than not at the minute. Leinster recently, and they seem to be on the crest of a wave, which is good to see. Ireland need all 4 provinces performing well, I believe, to really go on and to build a squad that can compete at a World Cup. And at the minute, you've 4 provinces that are doing very well. Connacht also, brilliant performance. I'm sure you'll get onto them in a little bit, but across the board, there's young talent, there's good coaches in place, and real feel-good factor about rugby in Ireland at the minute. And Ulster can kick on, hopefully. The worst thing they could do now is not back that up. I'm sure they'll be speaking about that. It's hard to get to the pitch emotionally and physically and mentally that they may have been at last Saturday. And to back that up, that's probably one of the hardest things in rugby, to create that same atmosphere, to come up with those big moments, to stay as true to themselves as they were down in Clermont, because it's backs to the walls down there. It's, everyone is focused in on what you're doing, and it can be, I wouldn't say easy, but it can be easier to really go to the well and that dark place that you need to go to for those big wins. So I hope they can back it up, and I hope all 4 provinces can have as positive a weekend with the uncertainty that we spoke about.
It's really interesting you mentioned the Leinster game there as well, because it was a brilliant performance in a very different way, wasn't it? The way they actually tactically went about that, really restricting their attack to very narrow carries, really direct, probably a fair degree more kicking for pressure, and just not allowing Leinster to get those kind of turnover access points into the game where they thrive from. And as you say, Gav, this was such a different performance. It's nice to see a team being able to have that kind of variety within a short enough space of time, and with an underperformance that they'll feel an underperformance in between those two games. But there was a real nice show of good coaching to that, as well as maturity and game intelligence, I suppose, from the players to be able to do that. And then, as we mentioned, they have the weapons and the enthusiasm probably of youth, but you're seeing the likes of Hume and Timoney and Lowry now really maturing into guys who want to go and dominate games in their own way. I think it's brilliant. And you're so right, Mike. Like, that's what you want to see from an Ireland point of view. James Hume, there's no doubt that he's talented enough to put some pressure on Gary Ringrose over the next couple of years. That's not ignoring the excellent form of Ringrose and all he's done over his career. That's all important as well. But you absolutely want a guy like Hume just breathing down on him. And he said it after the Leinster game. He said how frustrated he was not to play over the course of November. He feels he should be involved. He's a confident young player with a great skill set. And that's what you want to see, real competition for spots. It's brilliant.
Just to pick up upon what Mike was saying a minute ago, Murray, about it being difficult to reproduce the emotional pitch that Ulster managed to generate down in Clermont. I might be getting a little bit ahead of myself, but maybe they won't need to this weekend. When you look at Northampton Saints, as well as they have been going in England, they took an absolute tonking at home to Racing. Maybe they might be a little bit checked out of the competition mentally this time around, and Ulster at 70%, 75% get the job done. Suddenly you're 2 from 2 in Europe and things look so different. I mean, polar opposite to how they looked this time last season.
It's a really unmissable chance, I think, for 2 out of 2 for Ulster, given how Northampton looked mentally checked out last weekend against Racing, who were really good. Finn Russell was on form. Their forwards got over gain line. They made it really tough. But I thought defensively, Saints weren't there. They were not working hard enough around the corner to fill those slots either side of the breakdown. Communication looked to be poor. And when you've got an attack coach as astute as the aforementioned Mike Prendergast, you're going to get picked apart in those areas, and Racing did that really well with those lovely inside passes and some other little bits of ingenuity from their playmakers. Beale and Russell obviously working in tandem really well. So yeah, it's a wonderful chance for Ulster back at home on a Friday night in Belfast, where they're always strong, where they've always got excellent support, and where they've now got, as we've said, players with real confidence behind them. So I think it's a brilliant chance for them to kick on now and get that kind of run that they've been looking for, that consistency back to back, and get it together. And yeah, you're right. It's probably ideal in the circumstances that they play a Saints side who already look like they're focusing elsewhere.
What stood out to you, Mike, about Connacht last weekend?
Just their confidence, their clarity in what they're doing, the belief they have, and no more than Ulster. Really hope now that they can go on a run. I think the problem with Connacht is maybe they get a good win or a good run, and it comes to the crunch, and maybe it's not backed up at the crucial point where they can really kick on. So they're obviously talented enough. They're brilliantly coached. I think Andy Friend has done an amazing job up there. Anyone you speak to speaks glowingly of him. I see them being contenders if they can go on a run like they did back in 2015, 2016. And yeah, they've more than enough talent. They can do something special this season if they get it right. And no more than Ulster, as I've said a few minutes ago, they more often than not at the minute they do seem to be getting it right. It's just, can they go on an extended run now? Can they make the sports ground, which is traditionally a very hard place to go, an absolute fortress? Can they pick up a couple of away wins that can bolster their home form and put together something special? They have all the raw materials, and it would be very interesting to see where they can go this season, because they seem to be in a very, very good place.
Jamie McGilloway in the members' WhatsApp group, Murray, was asking, with Carberry out and with Harry Byrne having his own injury troubles and maybe not wowing us to the extent that we hoped he might, maybe through no fault of his own as well this season so far, should Ireland be looking towards Kieran Frawley as a potential 10? We will get to Leinster in a moment. What about Jack Hardy? I'm sick of asking this question, but I know a lot of his assists were pretty much alley-oops at the weekend. Like, he's popping passes. One of them has a chance to bounce to Alex Wooden. But he's also running a backline that is creating that space in the first place. And I thought he looked brilliant again. I think if we're saying that Ulster are getting it right and Connacht are starting to get it right more often than wrong, geez, Carty's getting it right now. What is it, like 4 times out of 5 probably, looking at his form this season? That's a pretty decent batting average for a 10, no?
I suppose his issue is a strong word. His challenge was very similar to Connacht's challenge. It was getting consistency of performance and not having a high followed by a dip where you've made mistakes in a game. He was very honest about that. And obviously for a national coaching team staff, that is a big thing that they would look at and challenge him around. And he definitely is doing it now this season. Back to back performances. I actually can't really think of a very poor one or underperformance that he's put in this season. He has, as you say, been consistently excellent, and that's across the array of skills that he has. His passing range is beautiful. He's really nicely suited to how Connacht are playing. He's got multiple options around him now in their attacking structure. Lots of tight runners off him. Interesting defenders. He's got really good ability to make very late decisions, which is a massive benefit to a 10, particularly now with line speed so aggressive. His kicking game has got real variety to it as well. Both attacking kicks, he can really kick well long for tactical gain and territorial gain. He's brilliant at that, and has that range to go short as well, just in behind the defensive line. He's kicking off both feet. Even the techniques he's using inside, outside of the boot, mixing it up depending on what's going on in the backfield, always looking for those 50-22s. He's worked really hard on his defensive side of the game, and that's always a thing for most out-halves if you're not Johnny Sexton, really, where it's not a standout feature of your game, but he's doing that really well as being the captain and leader most of the time now as well. And by all accounts, he's really kind of grasped hold of that. I think naturally he's probably like a quiet enough or a guy maybe who's not always roaring and shouting and leading and being the kind of dominant voice, but it does sound like he's got his own style and stamp over the group now, and is probably some of the stuff Mike's talking about earlier on with Peter O'Mahony and being that really positive influence and enjoying it as much as he possibly can, signing a new 3-year deal, interests off the pitch, keeping him occupied as well. So he's in a really good space, and all of it is leading to that kind of consistency now. So you're right, absolutely, when they go to sit down and pick that Six Nations squad, I actually think his case is more compelling than it has been for a long time now.
Just to pick up on that, I think the fact that Carberry obviously is going to be out for an extended period now with the surgery to his elbow. Sexton has been injured. Hopefully he's back in time for the Six Nations, but he'll have very little rugby played. And the Burns, as you mentioned, like, he absolutely has to be in the mix, starting our bench, I would think, as things stand. His form's just too good. You can't ignore how well he's playing.
Mike, we can't ignore Leicester either. There is something reassuring about how in these strange and uncertain and maybe dark times, the Tigers seem to be becoming a genuine force again. Unbelievable win for them over the weekend. Connacht go there this weekend. Geez, if you can get a win at Welford Road at the moment, you're talking potentially season defining. It's going to be a tough ask, but how impressed have you been by Leicester's resurgence in the last couple of seasons now?
Yeah, very. It was weird to see them down the bottom of the table. Very strange after just being so strong for such a long period, 20, 30 years to the top of the English table and competing in Europe consistently, and then to see them down near the bottom, they had real trouble in staying up. An exodus of players. I see that Ellis Genge is on the way out, which is a big loss for them. Club captain, along with Ford, who will be leaving at the end of the season as well. So there'll be 2 massive losses for them. But the club seem to be in a much better place, which is good to see. They're too good a team, too good a squad, too proud a club to be down where they were. And again, similar to Clermont Stadium, going over to Welford Road and getting a victory is a marquee day if you can get it done. Munster did it a couple of seasons ago, and I was injured or uninvolved at the time, one of the two, but I just remember the guys being chuffed. It was just a massive occasion to go over to Welford Road and win in Europe. And if Connacht can do that, they're really setting their stall out that they're serious contenders this season. 2 from 2, and they put themselves in a great spot.
Yeah, easier said than done now, mind you, Murray. What kind of a chance would you give Connacht of doing that this weekend?
Leicester, obviously, firm favourites. I do think they've been really solid in how they deal with teams who have these kind of attacking threats. And it's brilliant just to see the confidence that Connacht have in their ability to go and pose questions. And I've no doubt that they will, and that they'll stretch Leicester's defence. I just think the way they're playing and the way they've got their big key guys in such excellent, imposing form, I think Maul-wise it's going to be a massive challenge. And obviously Connacht have worked really hard in that area of the game with Dival Senecal, the new forwards coach. That is going to probably be a decisive part of it. Listen, I do think Leicester will win this game, but I would be surprised if Connacht don't play well and ask them real difficult questions.
I think sometimes Leinster can fall victim of being so successful or being so consistently good that they might be left last to in a chat like this. But it probably was the most expected victory, the most routine victory against Bath. I heard a few people ask, would Leo Cullen be disappointed with, say, the last half hour where their performance dropped off? Bath kind of racked up a few garbage time scores, but it's only natural, really, Murray, isn't it? Like, it's very difficult to sustain what they produce in the first half hour for 80 minutes when you know the bonus point is already in the bag and bigger days lie ahead.
I don't know. I think there'll be concerns there for Leo Cullen and Lancaster. Last couple of weeks, I suppose, as you mentioned, they lost Ulster, and the way Ulster went about it will be worrying for them, because it felt like a bit of a continuation of a team in terms of how they were beaten and shut down and just kind of forced out of the game to a degree. Like, Bath are really, really bad this season, like really bad. They've been awful in the Premiership as well. They were obviously missing loads of players, so you should have expected Leinster to finish right over top, and they will definitely be frustrated with the sloppiness that kind of increasingly crept into their game. Of course, we hold them to high standards because they play so well, so consistently, but that's kind of slightly missing from the game at the moment. They're dealing with obviously a COVID outbreak in their squad, and you know, if the game goes ahead, we're still waiting on the confirmation. They're due to fly tomorrow morning to Montpellier to play. It'll be without a whole bunch of senior players, you know, so that is a challenge as well that we got to account for and factor into this, and maybe, I suppose, reduce those concerns you have for them. But I think they're still waiting to get to where they want to be and where they hold themselves to in terms of the quality of their play. Having said all that, there was loads of good stuff in the Bath game still. Loads of guys with impressive performances. The front row just continue to get better and better, and their form is astounding, really. Honestly, there aren't many front rows who are in better form than Leinster's starting and even backup or rotation front row. It's just such an incredibly powerful and potent and skillful unit. And there was loads of little nice snippets there and signs that they're going to get back moving in the right direction. But I actually think they will be unhappy with the last few weeks, to be honest.
Mike, their front row, best in the world?
Certainly up there. Furlong's the best three in the world. I don't think there's any question about that. Porter is positioning himself to be very much in that conversation. It's quite incredible, really, that he's performing so well, and you wouldn't even miss a player of Cian Healy's quality, who's been there for so long, can still come on and do an amazing job. If he started the likes of Dave Coyne, who's been putting serious pressure on the last couple of seasons, and Furlong has just taken his chance and ran with it. He's been exceptional this season. And then the two hookers, Kelleher and Sheehan, have just kind of run out of superlatives for them. Sheehan's try a couple of weeks ago was out of this world, and then Kelleher's he's really added set piece to his game. He has all the other parts that would make him stand out around the pitch. His strength, his speed, his ball carrying ability, his tackling, his poaching, but scrummaging and line-out throwing have really been up the notch from his side to the point now where if you were picking a Lions team, I think you'd put him in starting. So yeah, it's and it has gotten a lot of attention. The two players playing at two for Leinster and Ireland, like the competition that they will have over the next 10 years, hopefully they stay injury free, and it's intriguing watching as a former hooker. It's very intriguing to see just how good these guys could get, and they're already operating at such a high level at such a young age. When you have a good front row, that's a serious building block to build your team around. And And as Murray said, they were highly impressive at the weekend again. And probably they will be a bit downbeat about their performance, but that just shows the level they've played at for so long, that they can get a victory like that and still be seeking more. And even with the COVID outbreak, they're desperate for the game to go ahead, because even as depleted as they may be, they have full confidence in the squad and group of players that they have, that they could go down to Montpellier and give a good account of themselves. But yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty. It's a crazy time for them.
Front rows win championships, Mike. I do. I promise people at home that, provided that Montpellier-Leinster game goes ahead, we'll speak about the boys in blue next week in a little bit more detail. I wanted to get your overall take, Mike, or your overall interpretation of what's been going on in the women's game. I suppose in recent weeks, but it has properly come to the boil this week. Everybody knows the story. I don't think I need to regurgitate much of what has happened. But as we sit here now, what do you make of it all?
Without being on the inside of it, it's two parties that are completely at odds with each other. The two letters that came out during the week were extremely strongly worded, very pointed in their talking points, and it would seem that they're at an impasse. They might need a fairly strong mediator to come to some sort of agreement or arrangement, because what's happening at the minute isn't satisfactory for either side. And it's just a bit of a mess, to be honest. Yeah, like you saw what happened with the Irish women's football team a couple of years ago. They had a bit of a stance, and at the minute they're getting good coverage, good crowd at their games. Their standards and performances and results seem to have improved. And maybe the Irish women's team have looked at that and taken a bit of heart that, you know, they do need to make change internally. They need to make change from the top down, and that's what they've gone after very strongly. It'll be interesting to see what happens. The government now involved. It's gone very serious all of a sudden, and I hope there can be some sort of resolution, because, you know, it wasn't a good spot to be in for them not to qualify for the World Cup, and the fallout from that. It's not where you want to be. It's not where those players want to be, and changes do need to be made. Fundamentally, at what level, I'm not overly involved with the women's game. It would appear quite a lot, but Murray might have a better take on the exact nature of what's going on and what can be done, but it's very messy.
Yeah, Murray, we have spoken probably in a fair bit of detail in recent weeks as to where that change, well, we feel, and we'd probably share a lot of the thoughts of the female players or the, well, current and former players that wrote the letter as to where things can improve. I suppose it's important to draw some kind of a parameter or provide some kind of context here, Murray, in the sense that I've seen a lot of people who, I don't want to say are siding with the IRFU, but have almost dismissed the players' letter because, as they see it, this women's senior team who failed to qualify for the World Cup were given ample resources in order to be able to beat the opposition whom they failed to beat ultimately, and that it's almost like they perceive the letter to be reaction to this World Cup qualification campaign. I think it's important to note that, like, this has been coming down the tracks for a lot longer than a poor World Cup qualification campaign. And whether or not they'd made the World Cup, I think there would have been some kind of public airing of grievances. It might have been only a couple of individual players, maybe not as coordinated and not as massive as this joint letter, but maybe it might have been. I don't know. Like, you and I and Bernard were talking about this letter. Was it maybe 3 weeks ago, Murray? Like, it had been coming down the tracks for a while. It wasn't just something they decided to do during the week.
Yeah, it has been coming down the line for a long time, and it was just a case of whose names were going to be on the letter, I suppose. They mention in it, like, decades, I suppose, of frustrations in this manner and of trying to work privately with the RFU to get improvements. And there have been relentlessly consistent negative stories around women's rugby. You just have to go back even through last year with the Interpros changing scandal, I suppose, as it was. There's been Adam Griggs, before he came in, that position was advertised as a part-time role rather than a full-time role, all the way back to 2012 with travel to games. There's been that legacy kind of initiative and campaign amongst players at one stage. There's just constant controversy and turmoil And it's definitely built to this point where you've got this incredible statement from, like, half of the people on that list are in the current Ireland women's squad. It's an absolutely incredible thing for them to do, and certainly would have been highly and strongly thought through before they put their names out, as well as some really key figures from the not so distant past, including some legends of the game like Lynn Cantwell and Fiona Coughlin. And Lynn Cantwell obviously is in the game now, working with the South African Rugby Union. So obviously you're not going to be putting your name lightly to that. It's taken a lot of feeling built up over a long time to get to this point. As Mike says, it's an absolute mess, and you've got the government talking about it in a Oireachtas kind of hearing yesterday, and mention of funds being withheld until the IRFU get things sorted. I think that would be an absolute disastrous outcome, because then you're actually setting the game back in terms of its progress as well. So that's not what you want to see. It's really embarrassing for the IRFU. I mean, this is on news stories now. It's not just rugby. It's all over the place and everyone's talking about it. That's absolutely not what they want. So it's about getting resolution from this. The players are asking for transparency in the reviews. That's the main thing they're asking for. Like, absolutely, that has to be part of it. And I think the minister is going to meet the IRFU will result in a bit more of that. Maybe not a full document being made public, but potentially a little bit more overview over how the key findings are decided upon by the IRFU themselves. I think you're probably moving towards the director of women's rugby and director of sevens rugby roles being split. There's a clear and pointed heavy criticism of Anthony Eddy, I feel, in that letter. They're talking about untrustworthy leadership. The players were obviously extremely unhappy with his lack of willingness to accept accountability in his recent briefing with the media as well. So I wouldn't be surprised to see that role split. And again, we've discussed about getting connectivity and joined up work at that AIL level up into the high performance, and maybe improving that level of the game to help the national team flourish. And it's a shame, because everyone who's working in women's rugby almost gets kind of criticised by this letter, but that shouldn't be the case, because there's loads of people doing really incredible work, like selfless volunteers, people who are really hurt by this kind of stuff and feel they're being, I suppose, pointed out as well, which is not the case, I don't think. There's people doing that all across the game. Someone like Amanda Greensmith in the RFU and Collie McEntee are genuinely working really hard to improve this, but it's clear that there's a massive divide there, and it's an incredible point to get to. But as Mike says, hopefully reflect on this as the moment, because it's just rolled on and on with these controversies over and over. It dips out of the media, comes back in, but this is a bigger move than ever before. So hopefully we get some genuine change and positivity off the back of this.
Yeah, you mentioned some of the figures who might be almost collateral, if you like, in this dispute, and we got an email along similar lines from Jack Wilson. It's extremely long, so I actually can't read it all, but just to pick out a couple of the points that Jack did raise. He's kind of coming from the point of view of, he has heard everybody praise the women's letter and basically take their side in this dispute, and feels as though the IRFU probably aren't getting a fair shake in media terms and in the general discourse around this whole thing, right? So, like, one of the things he says about the women's letter is that it's a mass of sweeping statements that tar practically all IRFU employees over the years with the same brush. If I was an employee in there and I've bust my gut to try and better the women's programme, and I received this sweeping attack, I would be livid, demotivated, and question my future. I think it's wrong that no acknowledgement has been given to those who are working with the girls' best interests at heart. He adds that the only recommendations or requests I see from the letter are for the reviews to be made transparent. What does that actually look like to them? Them being the players. Is that 1,000 plus PDF documents of every conversation that the independent review team has had with every player who took up the invite to talk with them? Is it going to be testimonies of staff, coaches' dealings with players where people will be openly criticising players, staff and their shortcomings, naming names, etc.? If so, then surely they can expect to see their on-pitch failings, such as a woeful line-out and set piece in Rugby World Cup qualifiers, being highlighted as a key reason for their failure to qualify. Yes, there have been shortcomings from the IRFU in hitting their targets, but with the resources they had, the players they had, they simply did not perform in the qualifiers. Factors that could include lack of match practice, and etc., etc. But if they're holding the IRFU to account for not hitting their targets, I'm confident they didn't hit their own on-field targets either. He also asks, what would Greg McWilliams make of all of this? I mean, he's walking into a wasp's nest, so to speak. I'm sure, to be fair, McWilliams would have been consulting with players long in advance of his officially taking the role this month, and probably would have been aware as well that something like this was coming down the tracks. But look, I just wanted to give a sense of the other side of the argument, because in fairness to Jack, he does make the point in his emails on several occasions, like he is actually, or he does have a vested interest in the women's game as well as the men's game, but just that maybe the coverage of this is too one-sided. I think go for it, Murray, actually. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah. I think I've kind of made some of those points there, but like, it's also on the IRFU to remedy and resolve this issue. Like, their statement, the response to the letter was just so aggressive and confrontational, in my opinion, and unnecessarily so. I think you can absolutely make some of the points they did while having a slightly more, I suppose, open approach to saying, yeah, let's actually listen to this, because it just underlined all the points that the players were trying to make in their letter. And for a union's own players, like there's nearly 30 of them, current internationals, who I'm sure Greg McWilliams will really want some of them to be heavily involved. For them to be coming out in this way, you've just got to listen to that. Like, absolutely, I totally agree. And I think all our coverage of the Ireland women's team in that tournament, that qualifier, reflected the fact that they did underperform. And I think people have probably ignored the players since, or just don't read those articles. The players have absolutely put their hands up and accepted accountability for their underperformance, because that's what it was. Just based on the potential in the squad, they should have qualified. Absolutely, the line-out was terrible. The breakdown was really poor. But like, when your players aren't performing to that level, you've got to look at bigger issues about why that is, and improving your production line, and improving the, I suppose, environment so that players can absolutely get the most out of their potential. So the RFU are absolutely responsible for those things, and if they want this to get better, then they've got to work with players, and vice versa as well. There's got to be a I think mediator is a good word for it, Mike. There's got to be a kind of coming together and a progressive result from this. Like, let's not just let this civil war roll on. It's got to be there's got to be a result out of this that makes everyone better.
Yeah, I'm sure it won't be the last time we speak about it, but that is all we've got time for today. Murray, thank you as always.
Cheers, Gav.
Mike, great to see you. Thanks a million.
No problem, lads. Pleasure. And as always, a few technical difficulties when I'm on board, but thanks for bearing with me. I'm not sure I was to blame today, but I'll take it. Don't worry.
No, though, there are always work-ons for us on that front. Don't take any blame. Cheers, boys. And thank you to everybody at home as well for tuning in, as always. It's members.the42.ie if you want to join the good folks in the 42 Members Rugby WhatsApp group. You also get access to Rugby Weekly Extra, which will be back early next week, looking back on all of the provinces games in Europe. That's Murray and Owen Toolin, and sometimes guests as well. God, what else have we got? An end of year behind the lines special with Gav Cooney, Emma Duffy and myself. I'm not exactly sure when that's scheduled to release, possibly today. Loads more. Just go to members.the42.ie. You can check it out there, see if you like it, and sign up for a €5 a month or €42 for the year. And there is a Christmas gift scheme as well. If you fancy that, go to the 42. The details are all there. Until Monday for Rugby Weekly Extra listeners, or next Thursday for non-members, mind yourselves. Enjoy it all over the weekend. Take it easy.